Based on the Catholic Social Teaching, or CST, the theme today is corruption, the need for transparency and accountability. Corruption has infected all levels of the Malaysian society and the three major powers of the government. The Catholic Social Teaching offers clear guidelines in terms of promoting a governance of integrity, transparency, and accountability. Three questions we need to consider. 1. How does the Church look at corruption? 2. What solution does the Church propose? 3. What is the role of the Church in the society ridden with corruption? The first question, how does the Church look at corruption? Basically, as a deformity and a structural sin. In number 411, the CST explains that political corruption among the deformities of the democratic system, quote, is one of the most serious because it betrays at one and the same time both moral principles and the norms of social justice, unquote. Besides, political corruption, according to the same teaching, quote, compromises the correct functioning of the state, having a negative influence on the relationship between those who govern and the government. It causes a growing dissatisfaction in the citizens with regard to politics and its representatives, with the resulting weakening of institutions. Corruption radically distorts the role of the representative institutions because they become an arena for political battering between the client's requests and the governmental services. In this way, political choices favor the narrow objectives of those who possess the means to influence these choices and are an obstacle to bringing about the common good of all the citizens, unquote. The CST also view corruption as a structural sin. In number 193, the CST identifies corruption as one of the structures of sin that dominate relationship between individuals and peoples. The CST declare that, quote, they must be purified and transformed into structures of solidarity, unquote, through the creation or appropriate modification of laws, market regulations, and juridical systems. The second question, what solution does the Church propose? Basically, accountability. A clear example is the statement of Archbishop Franklin from Rwanda, who called on foreign oil companies in the mid-2002 to make public what they pay Angola's government in fees and taxes. Archbishop Franklin said, quote, this would be good for the country, good for the people, because this money doesn't belong to the government or to a particular political party, but to all the people of Angola. The people shouldn't be living in misery when the government is taking in so much money, unquote. His statement is applicable to Malaysia in the arena of being accountable to the people for the use of public monies. A second example is that of the statement of the U.S. Bishops' Conference that call on individuals and corporations involved in extractive industries. The U.S. bishops urge these individuals and corporations to consider their moral duty in ensuring that resources are used for the common good. Let me quote, governments, international financial institutions, and private corporations involved in the exploration, development, production, and sales of natural resources, for example, oil, diamonds, etc., all have a moral responsibility to ensure that the otherwise legitimate developments of these resources does not contribute directly or indirectly to corruption, conflict, and repression. Transnational corporations ought to adopt codes of conduct that reinforce their social responsibilities, direct their activities towards the common good, and adopt transparency in operations and financial accountability, unquote. What then, the last question, is the role of the Church? There are 2 points. The first is to promote solidarity as a social ethical principle. The Church speaks of solidarity as a social ethical principle and a moral virtue. First, solidarity as a social and ethical principle. In number 193, the Catholic social teaching states that solidarity is a social principle because solidarity fosters new relationship of independence between individuals and peoples, that is, between the government and the rakyat, and vice versa. Furthermore, in CST number 193, the Church affirms that, quote, solidarity rises to the rank of fundamental social virtue since it places itself in the sphere of justice. Hence, solidarity has to be ethical in that the Church calls for the building of a relationship that is not aimed at exploiting the rakyat, but a relationship that is right and just, bent on serving the rakyat, especially the excluded and the marginalized. The second point, the role the churches promote solidarity as a moral virtue. It is a moral virtue directed par excellence to the common good and is found in a commitment to the good of one's neighbor with the readiness in the gospel sense to lose oneself for the sake of the other instead of exploiting the other but to serve the other instead of oppressing her for one's own gain and advantage. Guided by solidarity as a moral virtue, CST in number 355 declares that public spending has to be directed to the development of all rakyat. Just, efficient and public financing will have very positive effects on the economy because it will encourage employment growth and sustain business and non-profit activities and help to increase the credibility of the states as the guarantor of systems of social insurance and protection that are designed above all to protect the weakest members of society. CST 355 further emphasizes that, quote, in the redistribution of resources, public spending must observe the principles of solidarity, equality, and making use of talents. It must also pay greater attention to families, designating an adequate amount of resources for this purpose. Unquote. Our role as church in Malaysia is to call on the government to be accountable to the rakyat because as taxpayers, we have a right to know how the public monies are spent. We need to call on the government to promote solidarity between the rakyat and the MPs so that they are always just in their relationship with the rakyat. Last of all, as church, we need to foster solidarity as a moral virtue, a sense of total giving of self in the selfless service of the weakest in our Malaysian society. Thank you very much for your attention.